when it comes to the off with his head tour stop, at least the one that happened in Red Bank, New Jersey, Hasan, partly thanks to him locking up people's phones, seems to be ready and willing to be a bit open about how he feels about things, whether it's race, a little bit of politics, though specifically he focuses on Hunter Biden of all people. And of course, he also speaks about what it's like to be a Muslim Indian American in terms of his generation versus the old generation, amongst many other things. So to summarize the roughly an hour and a half set length, naturally, Hasan has openers, but unlike a lot of comedians, Hasan's openers aren't counter-programming or kind of ill-placed. Sabine and Ishmael are very much of a similar ilk to Hasan in terms of what topics he talks about. Sabine talks a lot about being a Muslim woman, family, dating, relationships, and also the sort of adaptations or expectations she's had to modify in order to do certain things. Like, for example, she isn't necessarily like highly conservative in this to the point of wearing a hijab or anything like that, but she also recognizes that when it comes to love, she wants somebody who is Muslim or is at least willing to convert. And of course, she makes jokes like how men are more willing to convert to Islam than they are to commit to her in a relationship. Things like that. As for Ishmael, he decides to push things in a little bit more of a controversial way. And taking note that he wrote on Patriot Act, his style of comedy is almost like how Hasan could act if he had nothing to lose. I mean, Ishmael does a 9/11 joke, for goodness sake, and he's a Muslim person doing it, so it's in context, it was funny. I know it's hard to imagine a 9/11 joke being funny, but in context, it was comical. So, and I just feel like when it comes to them and what I like about them so much, and again, be something we'll put into the highlights, is that in many ways, Sabine kind of represents the family relationship and sort of cultural aspect that Hasan often talks about. And then Ishmael addresses the more controversial ways that Hasan may bring up topics or the topics that he chooses. So that when Hasan comes on stage, it's not the usual case of you had to suffer with these two people before, but it seems like the proper steps were taken before the headliner came out so that you are properly warmed up and not agitated, which leads us to the headliner. Hasan is clearly in a different era. Gone away is the whole Patriot Act, let's have a bunch of screens, PowerPoint presentation, and all that type of stuff. Instead, in many ways, he goes back to basics. But even with him going back to basics, he's not necessarily trying to do what every other person or stand-up comedian rather is doing. Does he bring up politics? Absolutely. He talks about, more so he gives like little throw-out comments when it comes to the Palestine-Gaza thing, Vivek Ramaswamy. But really the only pseudo-political thing he really brings up is Hunter Biden, which has a decent amount of his set time. Mainly in the fact that Hunter Biden has had a really wild life, and the fact that he's even still alive or what he's done is just, honestly, with all the things that Hasan says about him, it makes you want to follow up on it because you can't believe what's being said. And in a way, it kind of sets up some of Hasan's running gags in terms of, that New Yorker article, and him making it very clear that he is a comedian. Not everything he says is worth fact-checking, since it should be assumed that, hey, there's going to be embellishments in here for the sake of comedy. But again, this is a new era, so it kind of feels like no longer is Hasan trying to walk on that tightrope of, being a comedian, but also being considered a news reporter. Now he is firmly in the comedian's side. So while he may bring up political issues, he may bring up straight from the headline type of stuff, that's not necessarily where he wants to live in, especially to the point of being taken serious. For, yes, him talking about his relationship with his wife, his parents, going to therapy, or Indian culture, these can be considered serious topics depending on what you're talking about. But at the same time, he wants to make jokes. He wants to make jokes about how he's a mama's boy in some cases. He wants to make jokes about how he feels ganged up on in therapy and things like that. And he wants to also address political correctness and self-righteous people. I mean, after all, phones are locked up, so yeah, I can tell you what happened. I can write a review what happened, but you have to take my word on it. And as shown by various media outlets, how people perceive things and what actually happened can be two very different things. So, when it comes to Hasan's set, he has no problem, especially because there's no video evidence, of making it clear that Asian groups, the whole Stop Asian Hate, that's not gonna happen because Asian people, whether you're talking about South Asian, East Asian, whatever, a lot of them hate each other, especially if they're right next to each other, where you're talking about India and Pakistan, Japan, Korea, etc., etc. And it's not just, of course, that he talks about, but he also addresses his own community, whether it is the toxicity of some of the men, especially the uncles, as he refers to them as, and a few other things. Clearly, Hasan has not gone the road of Dave Chappelle or others where he's now defensive and that's where he lives, but instead, it's a lesson learned. I'm going to embrace what happened and, make a joke out of it, because essentially, what do comedians do besides, as I think he said in some way that I can't recall properly, they take what can be considered tragic, detrimental, uncomfortable, and find the funny in it. So, get into the review portion. Honestly, I've seen stand-up comedy for a while now where you're talking about Ali Wong, Whitney Cummings, there was some men too, Dion Cole, and a few others who of course had openers. But I feel like for a lot of them, the openers have always been like counter-programming. If it's someone like Ali Wong, their opener is somebody who isn't raunchy, who feels very much more of a safe, clean comic compared to them. If it's someone like Miss Pat, who if you've seen her stand-up or a show, Miss Pat is very much an urban comic. So to have somebody that's a white boy in front of her, can be jarring. In the same case of Michelle Wolf and I think Whitney Cummings, they also had somebody who didn't necessarily fit their vibe or the themes they often do. So to have people like Sabine and also Ishmael as the openers for Hasan, it felt more like a cohesive unit. Like, it's not just these are the locals, they was able to show up, or these are my friends, but you actually put thought into who should open for you. For when it comes to Sabine, it feels like her purpose was to see, are you ready to laugh? Ishmael's purpose was to see how far can we take things and you still laugh. And then not allow for Hasan to really just open up and take advantage of them warming up the crowd and, just going full force, especially because, we can't record anything. And I just hope when it comes to other comedians, they find people who are more so similar to them rather than drastically different, in hopes that it makes you so happy when a headliner finally comes on. The next highlight is, while of course like many, I hate when these comedians or any type of live performance forces me to lock up my phone, at the same time, I get it. Is it annoying when you get there early, your phone's locked up, and you have nothing to do but people watch? Absolutely. Never mind, it makes it so you can't really tell if it's about to be late or if you have enough time to run to the bathroom, but it is what it is. For, as shown by Hasan, feeling like he can now say something controversial because there was no video evidence, even though truly he did not say anything controversial. If anything, Ishmael's joke about 9/11 was the most controversial thing, but getting back to the point, because there's no phones, you feel like there's a bit more freedom, and also that there isn't the same level of accountability that a lot of comedians kind of rally against. For, you have to remember, this tour is going on until I think like June 1st, and we're currently in November, which means he's still very much in the process of working on what material is going to be kept, what may be modified, what may be deleted, or maybe it's only done in certain areas. Like, there's certain jokes that you know are going to do better in Red Bank, New Jersey, which is a Democrat state, versus going out to Tennessee, Vegas, or other places. So, with that in mind, he can do jokes like having having some of Hunter Biden's cocaine being found in the Oval Office, and hoping that maybe one day somebody sprinkles it on some kid's head, so when Joe is doing his usual sort of awkward thing, maybe he'll sniff some up and pepper up. You know, he can say stuff like that, and yes, I might be telling you the joke, but it's, you know, there's no video evidence to say that he did say it, and he can switch it up if he wants to the point where it's like, I may say that he said it, but there's no proof. And just overall, since I feel like I'm rambling at this point, as much as you recognize that it's inconvenient to not have your phone, to see the freedom that it gives comedians to do what they feel is controversial, and maybe get a laugh, maybe provide the audience some insight they may have not thought about, it helps you understand that this isn't just some person getting a mic and just spewing whatever they want to say. There's an art to it. There's some type of technicality. And in order for them to truly express themselves, there needs to be a certain understanding and trust from the audience that you know what you signed up for. Speaking of signed up for, when it comes to a lot of comedians, crowd work is part of their thing. It's what gets them comfortable on stage with a whole new audience and, you know, helps them get a vibe. And Hasan is no different. Like most comedians, he doesn't spend his whole, I'm assuming, hour set because he had no phone. He doesn't spend his whole set just having a one-way conversation or just giving monologues. Instead, he seeks out audience to know, help the jokes and for also relatability. So, for example, one of his earliest jokes dealt with the financial diversity rather than address the racial diversity in the audience, and how he mentions his poor people on the back, and then his rich people paid $200 some odd for the tickets to be up front. And of course, he picks plays, depending how you look at it, with the people in the front, because he finds a couple in finance, works perfectly, finds a couple that's been together for a little while. So when it comes to talking about therapy, Bitcoin, stuff like that, he has his people. But of course, and this is where I kind of really dig how he does his crowd work, people far back where I was in the balcony, they want to participate. So when it comes to certain things that Hasan said, especially when he was starting to hold men accountable, there was a gentleman that said nope really loud to the point that Hasan heard them, and that became the toxic uncle. And there's something about that type of crowd work when you know that their set isn't just something robotic like AI written and they're just repeating or trying to remember all the lines they memorized, that makes it so it feels like it's truly live. It's curtailed to the audience that they're dealing with, and they're just not spewing the same thing from this town to this town and wherever. I mean, even in case of another person who was going back and forth in acting like, you know, sometimes things said on stage aren't rhetorical, to watch him professionally manage that situation so that he can shut them down and remind them that he's on with the mic, but not do so in a way that can be outright embarrassing or feel like he's picking on them. It really shows you the type of skill and talent that comes with years of work. And it really, honestly, when it comes to most stand-up comedy, I'm pretty much one and done. I said I've seen the person and that's it, but this is the second time I've seen Hasan in a live performance, and I would see him again because it just seems that he knows how to give a good show and make it worth your dollar. Hence why, overall, when it comes to the Off This Head tour, it's definitely something we're going to recommend because it's probably the most cohesive stand-up set that we've ever seen. The opening acts aligned with the headliner, and when the headline came out swinging, he stayed true to his shtick, could at the same time showed evolution. For with Hasan not being as reliant on technology, slideshows and all that, it felt more personal, And then when you consider how he handled the audience and even how he took advantage of, there being no recording devices, it gave you an experience that felt very much like you had to be there, rather than a case of what a lot of stand-up feels like, where it more so feels like you're getting early access to something that eventually is going to end up on Netflix, HBO, or wherever.